Hi. You're listening to the Corporate Cleanse podcast, where we talk about the pros and cons of corporate life and how I, a former fancy executive, hit full burnout and am now on a journey to explore how we all can maintain our sanity and sense of self, all while climbing the corporate ladder. I hope you enjoy listening along with me and know that everyone needs, occasionally, a corporate cleanse. Welcome back, everyone, and happy Monday. Again, I'm Jen, and we talk about the pros and cons of corporate life on this podcast. And it kind of waffles back and forth between sort of how to get ahead in your career without it completely crippling you, and also just kind of general wellness and mental health awareness as well. No part of this podcast is about, leaving or trashing corporate life, because we all have bills and we all have realities that we have to face. And so this really is about how we can do both and how we can maintain our sanity, especially as corporate life gets, honestly, just crazier and crazier as the days go on. So for me, this episode, it started because I got an email. Did I get an email? What was it? No. I was speaking to these women at this networking event, and they had said they were trying new things, and they signed up for this golf course, like a beginner's golf clinic. And they were like, you should try it. It's so fun. So I went online and I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. That sounds so fun. It's part of my try anything era because I'm unemployed and I don't know what I'm doing with my life. So maybe I can fill it with things that will make me feel accomplished. But then I kind of took a step back and I was like, I have tried to learn golf so many times in my lifetime. Like, the amount of times that I have attempted this is definitely not zero. And it sounds fun, like being outside. Wonderful. Can I bring snacks? Yes, I can. Great. Can I wear some fun golf clothes? Yes, I can. I mean, I'm not completely sold on this endeavor. I have qualms. I have many qualms about environmental impact of golfing in a desert, golfing in Utah. All that water in Utah, in a desert. Sort of the privileged nature of golf, the gender bias, the discrimination of its roots. But I will tell you something. How many companies have I worked at that at some point did a golf event? All of them. Every single one. Every single one of the companies I've worked at has had some sort of golf event, some sort of club that liked to golf, or an event to get to know your coworkers more. Like, every single company I've worked at has had a golf event. And when I thought about this, I started thinking about and reflecting on the times in my career that I have felt excluded. And I will tell you, I recall one golf event that I went to. It was, where was it? This was early days. This was early days at Vivint. And it was like an open sign up, and I was like, I've never played golf in my life, but I'll go try. And it was like, what is that word? A scramble, where it's kind of just like take anyone's best score. So I was like, okay, well, if I suck, that's fine. Maybe someone else is good. And they didn't let me drive. I think I did once, and I got it into like one of the water hazards. It's just a pond. And they were like, okay, Jen's not driving. But turns out my short game is pretty good. I grew up Mormon. So I have been mini golfing like since I could walk, really. That's like a wholesome activity. So I have a pretty decent short game. But I felt not necessarily part of the crew. I was kind of put on this team of misfits that kind of just wanted to show up. And then there were clearly people at this event that like golfed every single day together and had like matching polos and had inside jokes about their short game. And I didn't necessarily feel part of the club, part of the group. And exclusion, or this feeling of not belonging, is one of the most painful human experiences we can have. Or just this feeling of not getting a shot because of who you are or who you are not. And when you're not in this in crowd, because corporate life is often just a clique game. It's like high school. There are in crowds, there are favorites, there's social hierarchy. On top of the organizational hierarchy, there's nepotism. There are groups that spend more time together because of their similarities, their sameness, their shared life experience, their prior relationships, their interests, their religious backgrounds, their upbringing, the neighborhood they live in. Like, there just are these groups in the workplace. So I want to talk about this stuff today. I want to talk about nepotism, favoritism, and these kind of unspoken in crowds that you're not actually really sure what makes it an in crowd, but you're definitely not in, you are out. So we're digging into this topic, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one for me, but I really want to pick it apart because I think so many of us, like if you just peek on any sort of like Glassdoor review or something, favoritism is a really, really painful experience because it is that. It is this sentiment of not getting a shot because of who you are or how you are. And that hurts. That hurts on a personal level. Being really vulnerable here, I have a lot of trepidation about digging into tough topics like these. But we so often avoid these tough topics because these topics tend to be the most painful and the most like touchy, very, very sensitive topics to broach. I even tried to search other podcast episodes that talked about nepotism and favoritism in the workplace, and I couldn't find any. No one really wants to talk about this, even though it's a pretty common experience if you work in the corporate world. So many of us have witnessed favoritism, unfairness, nepotism, exclusion, and so many of us have suffered from these things, and yet we all don't talk about it. We all don't talk about this sort of trauma that we feel on a day-to-day basis. So today I am an imperfect human trying to talk through a very tough subject and trying to share sort of my experiences with these things to hopefully give some validation and maybe some language to those who are maybe feeling the same things. Some important context before we get started, because context is so important for these topics. I have spent my whole career in Utah Tech specifically. Utah calls it Silicon Slopes, which like, it's so funny because we are so proud of this thing. But then you ask anyone out of state and they have no idea what we're talking about. But it's just supposed to be a funny play because there's mountains and we ski and there's lots of tech here. That's all that means. Utah, just on its own, has a whole bunch of context, important context that has influenced my experience and will, of course, influence the way that I talk about these topics and the examples I give. So I would just kind of keep that in mind. And I'm sure many of us, whenever I say I'm from Utah, I get kind of like how's that? So I think keep that in mind, that Utah is a unique place. And that's going to definitely color the way that I talk about this topic. More context. I identify as a woman. I'm a woman of color. I am a working mother, and I've never not worked. I mean, up till now, right now, this time off I'm taking. But I went back to work 2 weeks after I had my daughter. So I worked through my entire motherhood. Nepotism and favoritism. Nepotism in the workplace means favoring family and friends over others for opportunities, including hiring, promotions, desirable project assignments, preferred shifts, merit pay increases, or any sort of openly available opportunity. While it's not illegal, nepotism is really destructive. It's one of the more destructive practices managers can introduce into the workplace. Now, we've likely all seen or perceived nepotism, especially in the workplace. And what is the typical reaction? Typical response is something like, well, they were the most qualified. That's kind of just what we get. It's like, oh, we run on a meritocracy. This person, even though they're related to me, just is the most qualified, which is like very subjective. It's very subjective because most of the time, how are you going to argue that? You don't. And so you just witness it. You think it's unfair, and it can really corrode your motivation at work, and it can really corrode your trust, whether that person was the most qualified or not. But witnessing this and feeling those feelings, I think, can really impact you, can really impact the way that you show up at work and the way that you feel towards your company and your leadership team. Here we go. Utah's majority religion, and I mean majority, not like little majority, like vast majority, is Mormonism, which I won't dive into this, but the Mormon culture prescribes to predominantly traditional gender roles of men and women. Men work, women stay at home and raise the family. The Mormon culture also has a really strong focus on families. So the families in Utah have upwards of 6 kids. Like that's very common. 6+ kids is very, very common. And with that have created what I call family dynasties around Utah that just rule. And the Mormon culture also encourages all male members to serve a mission for 2 years, and their companions or who they serve with can only be men. And these family dynasties, you'll see kind of the same last name just reign across billboards and buildings, and there are probably a couple other areas in the states that look like this. It's very kind of evangelical Christian roots is kind of where this started, but very large families. And so Utah kind of looks like this. 3 out of the 4 companies I have worked for, which again, majority Utah-based companies, Utah-founded, Utah-started companies, have had 2 brothers on the executive or founding team, have fathers on the founding team or on the board, and have had mission companions on the founding team or the executive team. 3 out of the 4 companies I have worked for, 75% of the companies that I have worked for have had these scenarios. Now, there are a lot of things I can be and do. Whatever the hell I want to be. Thank you very much. But there are things that I cannot be. A brother, a father, and a mission companion. Those are just categories that I will never be able to be. So this has been a toughie. This is a tough thing for me to wrap my mind around. And where I've landed is that this type of nepotism and favoritism is more a result of in-group love rather than out-group hate. This is how Brian Lowry, a professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford that I listened to on the Work Life podcast with Adam Grant, this is how he puts it. When you look at the way groups interact, in-group favoritism that is doing favors for people like you is a bigger part of inequality than actively discriminating against out-groups. In-group love is stronger than out-group hate. This type of dynamic and nepotism created a lot of anger for me early in my career, and I interpreted it solely as out-group discrimination, of being left out because of who I was or who I wasn't. this line between favoritism and discrimination is so, so thin. But this idea of in-group love rather than out-group hate really resonated with me. It helped me kind of understand this dynamic and maybe the motivations behind it that kind of took some of the sting out for me. So let's play this out. If I started a company, a software startup, let's say, I, of course, would seek out those people I trusted. People I had already formed a connection with, people that I had already worked with or have already, developed a decent bond of trust with, people that think like me. I, of course, if I had rich parents, would seek them out to help seed fund my business. They'd be the first call I'd make. Well, I don't know if they'd be the first call, my parents. But if I had wealthy parents, they'd be a call I would make. And if I made a $1 billion company, I, of course, would want to ensure all of my friends and family were taken care of. If I were a billionaire, I'd be like, yeah, man, every single person in my vicinity is going to be good and safe. I would want to spread those resources, the opportunity, the financial freedom all around to everyone near and dear to me. That would be my first instinct. So it's hard to judge. And it's hard to assign all of this malicious and discriminatory intent to these leaders of these companies, because if I had the same exorbitant privilege, I would probably do the same. So when I think about these companies that I've worked for, 3 out of the 4 having a fair amount of nepotism and favoritism at the very top ranks of the company, it's tough because I can't just sit there on my high horse saying that I would do it any differently. But the reality is that nepotism and favoritism, by definition, excludes people from opportunities and wealth building opportunities. Having a tech company and a board filled with family members, best friends, and mission companions excludes a lot of people and really silos resources and power. And of course, this kind of creates a scary unconscious bias because you've only got one type of thinking at the top level of these companies, one type of upbringing, one type of religion, oftentimes, one type of background, one set of values that is very singular and very exclusionary. I remember one CEO was trying to tell the founding story of the company, and he meant well. He really did. Of the company that he started, he kind of detailed how he was one of the first salespeople and how he would kind of drive his car around to all the sales calls and all the conferences. And he kind of just offhandedly mentioned it was an Audi. It was his first car. And I was like, sir, I drove a 1991 Pontiac Grand Prix that was red with a purple bumper because I got into a fender bender because it was a 6-cylinder, okay? No, why did my parents make this choice? I don't know. It was 6-cylinder. I got into a fender bender and we couldn't afford to replace the bumper. So my dad got a bumper at the dump and it was purple. So I drove this red Pontiac Grand Prix with a purple bumper. Having family nepotism creates an extreme form of thinking because life experiences, life ideas, life resources were all the same. And you start to forget that your life experiences is not the same of others. And especially as a CEO, this becomes, I think it's called advantage blindness, where all of the privilege you get in your life kind of makes you blind to the fact that someone doesn't have that same life experience, didn't grow up the same way you did, didn't have the same resources, didn't have the same opportunities. And I think what also makes this topic so hard is because when you call out nepotism and favoritism, it automatically gets met with defensiveness because it sounds like you're saying that this person didn't deserve this, right? Whenever you tell someone who has worked hard in their life that they were given an upper hand, it does not go over well, ever. Trying to tell somebody that they have privilege is like it's a minefield. You're like, just, oh man, the defensiveness you get that triggers because you're somehow taking away the fact that they worked hard. When it can be an and conversation. You worked damn hard and you had some help. You had a couple helping hands, right? And I have definitely seen defensiveness when I've pointed this out. I don't think this is a topic I'd ever point out again in my professional career, by the way. I don't think it's ever gone over well. And, I definitely have seen family members that were subjectively the most qualified. I'll give you an example. So the Qualtrics founding brothers, Ryan and Jared Smith. Jared Smith is Ryan's brother and came from Google. He was like a Sheryl Sandberg employee, was just like kind of a genius. And honestly was brilliant. He was a brilliant operator, made Qualtrics what it was, and arguably, like, related or not, was the best choice for the job to kind of run operations for the company. Nepotism and favoritism doesn't automatically mean that person didn't deserve it. That's key. I mean, most oftentimes it does, but like, who are you to know and judge? Like, it does mean that there are large groups of people that are shut out from opportunities just by being who they are. And that's where it gets painful, right? Whether that person was the most qualified or not, there was some exclusion there. There was some kind of behind the scenes things that just didn't make it seem like an altogether fair and just decision. And constantly being made aware of your otherness is really painful. That's what I think also favoritism and nepotism and these sort of in-groups that definitely exist, but no one talks about, can kind of constantly remind you that you are different, that you are an other. This is a sentiment that I have felt pretty much my whole life, is feeling just other. Like being raised as a person of color in a rural part of Utah. That was tough. That's a tough place to feel like you're just part of the crew. And then being a young mother in tech, right? I'm aware of my otherness, and it has been painful. It's been painful for me in my career. I'll give you another example of how this kind of in-group can forget and almost remind others of their otherness. When I worked at a company, we did this getting to know you game at the executive level, trying to guess who each other were by their childhood picture. And this was fun because we were like all getting to know each other. We all worked together all the time. We're like, let's just have some fun and get to know one another. And this was fun for like 99% of the leadership team, okay? Because they were all the same gender. They were the same ethnicity, similar age. And they had, a lot of them, known each other for a long time. So when you see these pictures of this little boy, playing Little League, you're like, oh, who could it be? Who of the 9 executive members could this be? How fun, right? I submit my photo, and it's a photo of me from when I was 6, and I'm in a full Korean hanbok because my mom really wanted that photo. I could not participate in the mystery of this guessing challenge because it was pretty damn clear who it was just from using your eyes. Like, my mom took me to one of those photo places in the mall. What were those called? I don't remember. But with my full hanbok, I have a gap in my teeth and I'm just smiling. I'm happy to be there. But I was reminded quickly in this game how other I am, how different, how noticeably different I am, and how quickly I think people that are constantly surrounding themselves with people they know, people they like, people who are similar to them, how quickly they can forget how excluding that can turn into quickly. How I deal with and navigate nepotism and favoritism. I'll be honest, bringing this up overtly has never gone over well for me. Like, again, I'll say this. I don't think I'm ever going to do this again in my career. I've only attempted it, I think maybe twice, and damn, I paid for it. I paid for it for sure. And this podcast has actually helped me, or this episode has really helped me crystallize some of my thoughts around these things, because it is painful. It's painful when I think about how it felt to know that 3 out of the 4 companies I've worked for were founded by brothers, and yet I was being told it was a meritocracy every day of my life. It's really helped me process. And instead of harboring all this resentment and pain, some things I've tried, or I've encouraged other colleagues to try when there's perceived nepotism and favoritism. These are some practical ways that I've tried. So when there is a promotion, for example, when there's a promotion and there's perceived favoritism, let's say your counterpart was given the title of senior director while you are not, while you're still director. And maybe that person that got the promotion plays basketball every morning with said senior leader, or served a mission with that leader, or their wives are friends or something. Ask for an official job description and qualifications between director and senior director. From your leader, from your manager, from HR, just say, hey, I'm interested in that career path. Could you detail for me what the differences are between director and senior director? And sometimes this will really force HR to be like, oh, we actually haven't written those yet, especially for early stage companies. And it'll help crystallize the differences so you can start to tease out some of the qualifications from the personal relationships. When there is someone hired, for example, someone hired and there's perceived favoritism and nepotism, ask if you can put your resume in, or ask if this is an open role that is available on the website. Most companies that are trying to do the right thing will list every job opportunity on the website as a job. They'll post it, they'll interview people, even if they're hiring some person that is fantastic and they're making a role for that person, they should still post it as an open opportunity for everyone. So just ask, just say, hey, is this widely available on the website? I'd like to apply. Or I have some friends that would like to apply. Again, I Googled many articles and podcast episodes on how to deal with nepotism in the workplace, and almost all of them recommend strong documentation and like some involvement with the HR team. Maybe I'm jaded. That's not a maybe. That's a faux show. I am jaded, but I don't have one example of where that went over well. Like, if you feel like you have a strong case of nepotism and favoritism in the workplace and you're going to document it and you're going to talk to HR, just being real, I've never seen that go over well for you. So it's one of those things that I'm like, is that a battle worth fighting? Probably, because nepotism and favoritism suck, and I don't want to see the pain that this causes in workplaces, but it better be a hill you're ready to die on, you know? Okay, next, let's talk about unspoken fraternities or in-groups. There has never been a company ever in the history of the world that has functioned without politics and social dynamics, okay? So the relationships we form, the people we trust, the people we get along with, the people we like, the groups we form, 100% matter. What I've encountered most is what I like to call unspoken fraternities. These groups or cliques that just seem impenetrable. Again, all spoken about with the Utah caveat. Utah's a weird place, again, so just please keep that in mind. But all these groups that form and that you just are like, I'll never be part of it. I'll never be invited. I'll never be considered one of the in-groups. When an executive was leaving, I remember part of the goodbye, so we had kind of like a thanks for your service, farewell kind of a meeting. Part of it was a slideshow of photos. And one of the photos was of 3 other executives shirtless on a boat in Mexico during President's Club. For those of you who don't know, President's Club is usually like a sales incentive trip. So the salespeople that do incredibly well get flown with their spouses and the leadership team, but only certain leaders, not all the leaders. That's important to note. All get flown to like Bali or Bora Bora or Hawaii or Mexico as part of an incentive for the year to be like, good job, you hit your quota. There are certain group dynamics that I am aware of that I can never be a part of. I have never been invited to a President's Club, even when I was an executive leader. I could never be shirtless on a boat with my coworkers. I mean, God, definitely don't want to be. Just because of who I am or who I am not. But my male counterparts have definitely been invited to President's Club and have definitely been there for the shirtless photo ops, right? And when I think about this, because of where I live and where I work, the majority of the men I work with were raised by stay-at-home moms, are married to stay-at-home mothers and wives, served missions with other men, and have really large families. That's just kind of the reality of the people that I work with, majority. So I'm never the one at our kids' dance recitals that gets chatted up about what's new with me or my career. It's always my partner that gets asked. I never get asked. It's always just assumed I'm home with my kids. And it's a really big reason why this golf hobby keeps making an appearance every couple of years. Everyone wants to feel like there's equal footing. I do. I want to feel like there's equal opportunity, especially in companies that claim they are meritocracies. And it's maddening to be told it's a meritocracy by a CEO whose brother and dad are on the leadership team. And it is painful and frustrating, and again, really triggers my injustice complex. And even though I do think it's more about in-group love than out-group hate, the out-group definitely doesn't benefit. If anything, the out-group really gets kind of oddly punished. One of my very close friends was on the executive team of a company, and she's wonderful. She's like one of the more warm, genuine people that I've ever met. And so part of her thing is like inviting people over to her house, right? She's like, okay, there's 10 executives. I want to get to know all of them. So she invites the couple over for dinner. She tries to get to know them, and she tries to have one-on-one lunches with the executives because they're working closely together. At the specific company, the CFO was kind of an older gentleman and part of the Mormon church, and was uncomfortable having a one-on-one lunch with my coworker or with my friend because she's a woman. She identifies as a woman. And that may be a principle that this person holds, the CFO holds, but that unfortunately really will hold back my friend, because that CFO is having lunch with the other male executives, building rapport, building trust, building shared ground. And my friend won't have that opportunity. And so even though I think these things don't come from a malicious place, they turn into malicious results pretty quickly, unfortunately. These sort of unspoken fraternities have looked different over the years for me. It's golf tournaments. It's mountain biking in the morning because you're neighbors. It's drinks after work when maybe you don't drink, or being made to feel weird about drinking when no one else drinks. I was at a company Christmas party, okay, and they had an open bar, but they didn't, like, not everyone drank because, again, the majority of the population here is Mormon. So you would have to go to the front desk to get your tickets, and then you'd also get a wristband of whether you were drinking alcohol or not drinking, or just drinking mocktails. And it was like a silver wristband or a gold wristband. And it was like a weird Starbelly Sneetch scenario where it was like, I'm going to have to wear a gold wristband and just look like a I don't know, an alcoholic for the whole night? Like what a weird move. What a weird move to make people identify as whether they drink or don't drink. It was so bizarre. It's early morning basketball because you're part of the same church group. It's mission buddies that spent 2 years, 2 highly emotional and trying years working together. It's March Madness. It's fantasy football. And let me just caveat this one, okay? I know more about sports than most. So I don't want to be like this, women just don't know sports, so don't use sports analogies. It's sexist. I grew up being quizzed on offensive football formations. I took my now husband to a Utah Jazz game, a summer league game on our second date. And my daughter taps me on the shoulder and is like, so he knows nothing about basketball? And I was like, guess not. I know a lot about sports. And so it's not necessarily that just talking about sports is sexist, but it's the not asking part. It's the not understanding the people you work with. None of these activities, none of them are bad. And none of these groups are inherently bad. It's more so when these unspoken fraternities lose all curiosity to get to know other people, to widen the circle. It's more so the mentality that you have your group of friends, your golf buddies, your 9 male siblings, and you're no longer interested in getting to know anyone else. That's when these in-groups can be pretty toxic, is because they create this sense of, I'm good. And you lose curiosity. You lose the need to understand and see a worldview that's different from yours. Again, I have seen many iterations of corporate speak to address these things. Like, 1, don't use sports analogies. 2, invite your female coworkers to go mountain biking. Listen, if you've never been mountain biking, whether you are she, he, or they, it's not fun. It's not a fun thing to go mountain biking for the first time. But these things are not really the answer. These sort of like wide sweeping, like just don't use sports analogies. They're not the answer. They're making sweeping statements about people instead of just, asking. Because do you know what would get you these answers? If you just get to know the people outside of your circle. Widen your circle of influence. Ask opinions from people outside of your inner circle. You'd probably learn that, well, Jen actually knows a lot more about sports than a lot of humans and can handle an occasional sports analogy. Or Jameson really likes to mountain bike, but he's going through some financial hardship right now and had to sell his mountain bike, so we can offer to rent him a bike for the next group ride, right? You start to just get information about other humans, and in so doing, become more inclusive. Become less exclusive, become more inclusive. Surrounding yourself with people you like is part of life. But at work is where it creates really high stakes exclusion. And what do I mean by high stakes exclusion? Why is this so important to talk about in these high paying industries like tech? Do you know who was a tech girly? Elon Musk was definitely a tech girly, like an OG PayPal tech girly. Bill Gates, also a tech girly. Lots of sports team owners are tech girlies. Tons of politicians have joined tech company boards. Tech employees, especially tech leaders, they have influence. They sit on boards, they hire hundreds of people, they invest in companies, they run foundations, they own sports teams, they influence state and city government, they organize community programs, they impact lives and families. The people we see at the top of tech companies become the people we see in the influential roles of our community. Who we hire, who we let in as part of the in-group, the in-crowd, who we give titles to, who we give tech money to, will dictate the makeup of our communities and society, and should be treated with the same gravity. And so when I talk about this topic, it's not just like, I'm left out. And that sucks. Like, it does for sure. And we shouldn't invalidate that. It sucks to not feel like you belong. But not only that, it excludes a really, really important diversity of thought and mind and upbringing to these really top tier positions of power. So it's not low stakes. Favoritism and nepotism isn't low stakes. It's high stakes. Because excluding the people that could make our world more inclusive keep getting shut out from the get-go, from the gate. Exclusion hurts on an individual basis, and it also impacts what our societies in future are going to look like. And again, what do I always say? Corporate life is just group projects. High stakes group projects that dictate our financial stability, our respect, our status, our ability to be happy. And I love what Brian Lowry said. In group favoritism that is doing favors for the people like you is a bigger part of inequality than actively discriminating against out groups. Nepotism, favoritism, cliques, fraternities, all came from a good place. They did. They came from a good place of good intent. Well, mostly good intent of wanting to show in-group love, which is 100% okay. But I think we all need to understand that it can quickly start to look like out-group hate and exclusion and can have huge impacts on people, groups of people, and our society as a whole. So that's all my ramblings for today. Thanks for listening as I picked apart a tough, but interesting topic. I'll see you next time.